As the United States celebrated its 150th birthday in the year 1926, Prohibition was in full flower. The Depression was just around the corner, and a rogues gallery of romanticized criminals with names like Dillinger, Capone, and Bonnie and Clyde were poised to capture newspaper headlines from coast to coast. But page 2 of these same newspapers told of equally charismatic lawbreakers whose more localized exploits, fueled by the poverty of the times and stoked by the astonishing profitability of black market booze, were just as amazing, celebrated, and romanticized. Legs Diamond, Pretty Boy Floyd, Dutch Schultz, and Machine Gun Kelly all grabbed hold of the roughneck criminal tradition pioneered by the Western gunslingers, injected it with their own dose of Depression-era desperation, and played it out against the wide-open canvas of America's dynamic sensibility throughout the roaring 20s and restless 30s. Prohibition, initiated in the year 1920, prohibited the sale and consumption of alcohol in the United States. The legislation was intended to boost the moral, ethical, and intellectual tenor of the American people. Unfortunately, for lawmakers, it didn't work out that way. With a direct assist from the Volstead Act, criminal activity exploded in the United States in the 1920s, with speakeasies, bootlegging rackets, and prostitution all combining to create an underground economy that at times threatened to overwhelm legitimate business. To get a drink, you would have to go underground. One of the most famous speakeasies was run by Texas Guinan, who greeted her customers with a cry of, "Hello, suckers!" Prohibition and speakeasies went hand in hand, and the illegal hooch created empires and monarchs. The Big Apple staged a battle royal to see who would be crowned king. At precisely 12 midnight on January 16, 1920, the Volstead Act served to close down every tavern, bar, and saloon in America. The next morning, Al Capone awoke to celebrate his 21st birthday. These two events, Prohibition and Al Capone's maturity as a racketeer and bootlegger extraordinaire, would ultimately define 1920s America more than any flagpole-sitting contest, marathon dance, or flapper ever could. And as the decade progressed, Capone's meteoric rise to underworld prominence and his ultimate dominance of the city of Chicago would closely parallel the 13 outrageous, villainous, and fantastic years of Prohibition. Years which saw Al Capone become the godfather of crime and also the first mobster to be featured on the cover of Time magazine. Petty thefts, con games, gang fights, burglary, extortion, attempted murder. These were the activities that shaped the childhood of Alphonse Capone. Born in 1899 in the rough-and-tumble Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, New York, he was the fourth child of Gabriel and Teresa Capone, who migrated from Naples, Italy to America in 1893. But although Capone had 8 brothers and sisters, he quickly distanced himself from the family hearth and took to the streets like a duck to water. Capone was physically suited for a life of crime. Even as a child, his stocky, unusually powerful build was a daunting force in the neighborhood, and his squat nose, thick lips, and huge hands quickly became notorious weapons of incalculable intimidation and violence. Early in his criminal career, Capone worked as a bouncer at the infamous Harvard Inn, one of the most disreputable brothels in all of Brooklyn. One night on the job, Capone made an unkind remark about a female customer standing at the bar. The woman's brother, underworld figure Frank Galluccio, heard what Capone said, pulled a knife, and slashed the youthful bouncer, leaving 3 nasty, indelible scars on the left side of Capone's face. Capone's resultant nickname, Scarface, became his trademark for life, although he tried valiantly to hide the hideous wounds with daily applications of talcum powder. But while Capone's appearance fit the classic mold of the streetwise hood, It was his brilliantly sinister mind which distinguished him as a force to be reckoned with in the netherworld of the criminal underground. Capone joined up with the powerful 5 Points gang while still a teenager in Brooklyn, spearheading the gang's assault on labor union leaders and successfully slamming them for dues kickbacks. The leader of the 5 Points gang was Johnny Papa Torrio, who quickly became the young Capone's criminal mentor, despite their wildly contrasting personalities. Scarface was a flamboyant and outrageous child of the media, telling reporters at one point that his facial scars had occurred while fighting with the famous Lost Battalion in France. But Johnny Torrio was quiet, subdued, and shunned publicity. And while Capone was arrested and prosecuted on a regular basis throughout his youth, Torrio successfully avoided the authorities and was the only criminal kingpin to emerge from the vicious street gangs of New York without earning a police record. In 1919, legendary gangster Big Jim Colosimo, Johnny Torrio's uncle, hired his nephew to relocate to Chicago to run a citywide brothel kingdom. Torrio immediately sent for his protege, Capone, and Scarface emigrated to the Windy City he would soon come to rule. Capone arrived in Chicago carrying the family Bible. He started work in Colosimo's criminal empire at a salary of $75 a week, toiling first as a bouncer, then as a bagman, then finally as a gun-toting bodyguard. Capone's street smarts, animal instincts, and criminal cunning were in full flower, but his aesthetic sensibilities were miserably lacking. It was Colosimo who introduced Capone to the narcissistic, high-living, socially flamboyant lifestyle of a gangster king, teaching him a rudimentary appreciation of opera on top of it all. But Capone was a leader, not a follower. He intuitively knew that to call the shots himself, he'd have to establish his own identity and independence. Immediately upon his arrival in Chicago, Capone set up his own legitimate business as a second-hand furniture dealer and set about installing broken-down sofas and love seats in all the brothels managed by Big Jim Colosimo. In 1920, Capone instantly saw the opportunity to move. He and Torrio teamed up to mastermind a way to capitalize on the lucrative potential that illegal alcohol trafficking could bring. When they presented their case to Big Jim Colosimo, he wanted nothing to do with it. The prostitution business was operating as smoothly as silk, and Colosimo saw no reason to devote any energy to such an untested and potentially problem-plagued market as bootlegging. Torrio and Capone decided to take action. On May 11, 1920, with Prohibition nearly 4 months old, Johnny Torrio called his uncle Big Jim and told him he'd have to sign for a special shipment of alcohol at a local nightclub. When Colosimo arrived at the club, Capone was hiding in a glass-walled telephone booth and fired 2 deadly shots, which killed Big Jim instantly. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Capone ripped at Colosimo's ornate silken suit as he lay dying to make his killing appear to be the handiwork of a common robber. This perverse but pragmatic touch instantly established Capone's reputation among Chicago's criminal underworld and would come to typify his flamboyantly original manner of retribution. The day after Colosimo's murder, Capone and Torrio were arrested and questioned by police, but no witnesses came forward, and the two were immediately exonerated. After Big Jim's $20,000 funeral, the first of many elaborate memorial services for upper-echelon gangsters, Torrio and Capone smoothly took the reins of Colosimo's criminal empire on Chicago's South Side. Papa Torrio became the brains of the outfit. Protege Scarface provided the muscle. And, lubricated by bootleg hooch, they ambitiously set their sights on ruling the entire city of Chicago. "Everybody calls me a racketeer," said Capone at the time. "I call myself a businessman. When I sell liquor, it's bootlegging. When my patrons serve it on Lakeshore Drive, it's hospitality." Despite the sophistication and chic elegance of the Prohibition era, the staggering profitability of bootleg whiskey, coupled with the financial windfall of the speakeasy trade, created a turbulent atmosphere of violence, wanton destruction, and utter lawlessness throughout the Windy City. Ironically, it was the same violence that soon led Al Capone to become the most powerful gangster in Chicago, as Capone and Torrio yearned to branch out to other parts of the city. Eventually, the Torrio Capone mob set their eyes on the more lucrative north side of town and the massive distillery and brewery operations of legendary mobster Dion O'Banion. The threat of full-scale warfare on the streets of Chicago loomed menacingly. O'Banion was an Irishman through and through who hated the Italians Torrio and Capone with a blistering passion. Though his public image was far from benevolent, O'Banion was publicly known as a regular churchgoer. His motto was, "My money goes to those who need it." And true to his word, he had food, clothing, and furniture delivered every week to the decrepit tenement districts in his North Side territory. But while O'Banion's outward appearance was charitably gratifying, he secretly wore 3 guns at all times in specially sewn pockets of his pants in order to further his deepest criminal ambitions. In 1924, O'Banion hatched a wicked scheme to take the spaghetti benders for all they were worth. He called Johnny Torrio, offered to sell him a North Side brewery for $500,000, and waited for the South Side capo to take the bait. Torrio did. Just days after the transaction was concluded, police, reportedly on O'Banion's payroll, exploded into the brewery, took Torrio into custody, and closed down the massive distillery. When Capone learned what had happened, he instantly took action. On November 8, 1924, 3 of his hired guns walked into O'Banion's flower shop and fired point blank at the gangster kingpin. O'Banion fell, mortally wounded, into a bucket of flowers. At O'Banion's funeral, which featured hundreds of dollars worth of bouquets from the very shop in which the mobster was murdered, Jaime Weiss, a close ally of O'Banion's, reportedly cried as a woman might and vowed on the spot to kill Johnny Torrio and Al Capone. 2 months later, after unsuccessful attempts on both Capone's and Torrio's lives, Weiss succeeded in driving the mild-mannered Torrio out of town. Papa settled for a more easygoing life back in Italy. The move left Al Capone at the age of 25 with everything. He was suddenly the undisputed king of Chicago's South Side and had a specially reserved box at the Opera with seats for all his bodyguards. Setting up operations at the lavish Lexington Hotel, Scarface hung a portrait of George Washington, his hero, on the wall, and purchased a lavish retreat in Palm Island, Florida. Capone's attention was ever focused on the lucrative North Side operations of O'Banion's successor, Jaime Weiss, and Scarface mapped out an ambitious plan of attack. But Weiss struck first. On September 20th, 1926, Capone was having coffee in the restaurant of the Hawthorne Hotel when Weiss materialized with his chief hitman, Bugs Moran, known as the Shootin' Fool, and 8 carloads of fellow machine gun-toting torpedoes. Raking the hotel with bullets, Jaime's hitman succeeded in destroying every window in the place. Miraculously, no one was killed. Capone emerged from the fray unscathed and called for a public truce with Weiss. But privately, Scarface had other ideas about Jaime Weiss and his gang. "Those bastards are dead," he yelled to his minions. "They're all dead, do you hear me? Dead, dead." Capone examined his squadron of 400 employees, selected his 4 top guns, Frank Diamond, Frank Nitti, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi, and set them off on a clandestine journey to the North Side. Once there, they quietly rented an apartment that looked directly into Jaime Weiss headquarters, mounted machine guns in the windows, and waited for the mob king to show himself. He finally did on October 11, 1926. Weiss and 3 of his bodyguards emerged from a touring car on the avenue below. Capone's 4 hitmen couldn't wait. They leveled their weapons down at the street, blazed machine gun fire through the night, and added Jaime Weiss to the lengthening list of hapless Capone victims. Explaining the hit later, Capone said, 40 times I tried to arrange things so we'd have peace and life would be worth living, but Jaime Weiss couldn't be told anything." With Weiss out of the way, Capone controlled every major vice racket in the city of Chicago, and quickly cutting politicians and policemen in on the outrageous bootlegging profits. Scarface set about becoming a legitimate power broker in the city as well. A previous mayor of Chicago, Joseph Klena, had once been pushed down the stairs of City Hall by Capone, who was never arrested for the assault. But Capone didn't want to just steamroll politicians, he wanted to own them. With this in mind, Scarface ingratiated himself with the Republican politico Big Bill Thompson and set the Capone machine in motion, patrolling Chicago poll booths to ensure Big Bill's election to the mayor's seat. The year was 1927. Capone was at the pinnacle of his criminal career, with his syndicate firmly in place, with bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling, doing bigger business than ever. And with Big Bill sitting in the mayor's office, Capone's profits soared to a cool $105 million a year. But as the 1920s drew to a close, Capone sought to expand his operations even further. He would eventually own an estimated 10,000 speakeasies in Chicago alone, and would completely control the bootlegging industry from Florida to Canada. With such outrageous profits came outrageous attempts on Capone's life. Scarface took refuge in an elaborate armored office that took up a whole floor of the Hawthorne Hotel. He rode about town in a massive, bulletproof McFarland limousine, especially built at a cost of $12,500, that was preceded by an armed car 1 block ahead and followed by another 1 block behind. Even though he was the evil genius of all gangsterdom, Capone was constantly fighting rival gangs like the Aiellos, the Jennas, and the O'Banions. After O'Banion was gunned down, Bugs Moran took over. They were still in control of the wealthiest, most desirable east side of Chicago. Capone had had enough of Bugs Moran and the O'Banions and ordered his henchman, Machine Gun Jack McGurn, to do them in for good. With Capone conveniently in Florida, Jack McGurn devised a plan that became known the world over as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929. McGurn dispatched 4 of his cronies, 2 dressed in police uniforms, to a garage at 2122 North Clark Street, a beer distribution point. 7 of Moran's gang were working inside. The phony cops entered the building at 10:30 a.m. as if they were making a routine raid. They lined up their victims against a wall and proceeded to cut them down with sweeping machine gun fire. They calmly walked out, got into a Cadillac, and drove off. 6 died immediately, but the 7th died 3 hours later and refused to talk, even though he was conscious. When the police arrived, the gruesome scene was too much even for the lawmen. One officer said, "It looks like 7 men drowned in a pool of blood." The only Capone hitman positively known to have participated in the attack was Killer Burke, and the mastermind behind this most classic mob hit of all time was Machine Gun Jack McGurn. In true gangland style, McGurn would himself be mowed down in a reprisal sling on the 7th anniversary of the crime. And other murders would follow, the most publicized being that of Alfred Jake Lingle, a veteran police reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Lingle was gunned down en route to a local racetrack. Initial speculation was that Lingle had exposed too many mob secrets in his newspaper column. Closer examination revealed that Lingle was, in truth, a Capone ally with ties to his massive illegal gambling operations. Perhaps the most brutal of all the Capone killings was performed by Capone himself when he lured a pair of traitorous gunsels to a lavish dinner in their honor. The room was sealed, and the pair were bashed to death by their former boss with a regulation baseball bat. Over the years, Capone's faithful henchmen had fared well, however, with virtually no casualties since the 1924 shooting of Al's ruthless brother, Frank Capone, by police as he engaged in petty thuggery. In the aftermath of the St. Valentine's Day attempt in his life, Bugs Moran faded from the scene, and Capone's power and influence within the criminal community reached its absolute zenith. But the overwhelming brutality of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, coupled with the staggering effects of the sudden stock market crash, caused public sentiment to turn against the folk hero like Scarface. A new wave of social reformers and evangelists, like Chicago's colorful Billy Sunday, urged Americans to return to decency.
America needs a tidal wave of the old-time religion. America needs to be taken down to God's bathhouse and the hose turned on her. And the time isn't far distant when the wheels of God's judgment are going to go sweeping through this old God-hating world. And I want to take a pledge in this audience to join me in a pledge that you will never rest until this old God-hating, Christ-hating, whiskey-soaked, Sabbath-breaking, blaspheming, infidel, bootlegging old world is bound to the cross of Jesus Christ by the golden chains of love.
A further vocal outcry arose when the public learned that Capone had murdered 227 would-be rivals and challengers to his throne. It was now clear that something had to be done to stop Scarface. Crime-fighting officials knew that the only way to truly destroy Capone would be to focus on his lucrative bootlegging empire. But as New York Congressman Fiorello LaGuardia noted, it would take a police force of 250,000 to enforce Prohibition and another 200,000 to police the police. Despite this, in September of 1929, a 26-year-old Prohibition agent named Elliot Ness approached United States Attorney George Johnson with a bold plan to demolish Capone's bootlegging empire once and for all. Ness theorized that a small, tightly knit group of agents operating under the auspices of the Department of Justice's Prohibition Detail and handpicked to ensure against bribery could level the lethal blow to Scarface's operation. After Ness was given approval for this unusual Capone-smashing project, he spent a month examining the personnel records of every available Prohibition agent. Finally, Ness put together a list of 9 men who would join with him to become the Untouchables, so named because they were completely incorruptible. The strategy of the Untouchables was to make a large enough dent in Capone's bank account so that he could no longer afford to put policemen, judges, and city officials on his payroll. Through brewery raids, truck confiscations, and the criminal prosecution of Capone's top personnel, Elliot Ness and his Untouchables punished the Scarface empire with a systematic resolve and weakened Capone irreversibly.
Somebody spilled the beans, and now Prohibition agents are spilling the beer. Thousands of gallons with plenty of kick. There's no doubt about it, the raid is a smashing success. Talk about showers, how'd you like to stand under this one? Before the raiders burst the doors and kegs, the brewery was turning out $5,000 worth of beer a day. At 25 cents a glass, this was 20,000 glasses per day. But now that day is gone forever. The foaming torrent is headed for the Chicago River, where the fish will inhale it free of charge. They say this kind of work makes even the agents thirsty. So sometimes they take time out to have a glass of water. But they manage to grin and bear it.
In late 1929, federal agents seized the financial records of Al Capone. And when he was brought to trial for income tax evasion, it was revealed that he had amassed a fortune of over $50 million in the 1920s without paying a cent of income tax. In 1931, Capone was found guilty as charged and sentenced to 11 years at Leavenworth Penitentiary, which would eventually include 8 years at Alcatraz.
Talk about excitement at the county jail. It's finally come to pass, and here's the proof. Mr. Alphonse Capone, alias Mr. Al Brown, alias the Big Shot, has met the enemy, and he is there, on his way to the Dearborn Street station with an escort that'll do credit to a sultan. It won't be long now before the world's most notorious gangster will be only an offensive memory. And if he behaves himself while he's a guest of Uncle Sam in Atlanta, he'll be out again in only 7.5 years. And so, up until 1940, Mr. Capone will be Mr. 40,886. Now, for a change, they're taking him for a ride. Let that be a good lesson to you. Always be sure and pay your income tax.
Here's a rare photograph of Al Capone's wife, May Coughlin Capone. Scarface went out of his way to keep his marriage to May out of the public eye. Capone's life of high living was over for good, though his legacy of criminality would ironically continue to haunt him. It seems that Scarface had contracted syphilis years before, and the disease began ravaging Capone's body unmercifully. It eventually developed into paresis of the brain, tearing away at the criminal mind that had orchestrated the most powerful criminal organization in American history. As a result of his illness, Capone was released from prison in 1939 and lived out his life peacefully at his estate in Palm Island, Florida. He died of bronchial pneumonia and brain hemorrhage on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. Upon completion of the Capone case, Elliot Ness went on to clean up the notorious Moonshine Mountains of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio. His story became the popular television show of the 1950s, starring Robert Stack, and the movie of the 1980s featuring Kevin Costner. In 1962, segments of the television show would be edited into a feature film called The Scarface Mob.
The feds have gotten up this special squad.
You tell. Well, it's a special squad, like Jake says. From all over the country, just to knock over our stuff.
How big's that squad?
Well,
How big?
7 or 8 guys.
And that's what's gonna happen to Ness.
7 men against Al Capone and his Scarface mob. 7 men who dared to challenge an evil empire riddled with vice.
Federal rates, there we are.
Starring Robert Stack as the federal agent who couldn't be bribed.
Come on, tell me how much you want.
Not a cent.
Capone, too, would be immortalized in a succession of films. In his lifetime, he would serve as the basis for indirect portraits by Paul Muni in Scarface and Edward G. Robinson in Little Caesar. Later, outright cinematic biographies would appear, including Al Capone with Rod Steiger in 1959, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1967 with Jason Robards, and Capone with Ben Gazzara in 1975. Around the world, the legend of Al Capone continues to grow even today, and Scarface's exploits have become a part of modern American history. In an era that saw the emergence of many great criminal minds, one thing is certain: Al Capone will be forever enshrined as America's most notorious gangster. This is New York, where gangland territory was an open battlefield, with the dynamic Legs Diamond and Dutch Schultz vying for power. Legs Diamond earned his nickname early on for his prowess at snatching packages from pushcarts and delivery wagons of the day. But his other nickname, the Clay Pigeon, was actually the more appropriate label. Crime fighters, criminals, and the American public were constantly amazed by the Clay Pigeon's seeming indestructibility. Underworld figures commonly joked that Legs had been shot so many times and carried so much lead around in him that he jingled as he walked. "The bullet hasn't been made that can kill me," Legs once bragged. He was born John Thomas Diamond in 1896, was raised in the tough streets of Philadelphia, and found himself drafted into World War I. When he deserted the Corps, Legs was arrested and promptly thrown into prison. It was at Leavenworth Penitentiary that Legs was first exposed to the intricate criminal underground of the era. Upon his release from confinement, he immediately went to work for Little Augie Organ in New York, a protege of the great gangster Louis Lepke Buchalter. Legs quickly learned the ins and outs of the criminal hierarchy and gradually worked his way to the very pinnacle of underworld success. By 1927, Legs was a powerful figure on the New York crime scene, but there was always Dutch Schultz, the Dutchman, to contend with. Schultz was born in the Bronx in 1902, a product of the sinister Bergen Avenue street gang. His real name was Arthur Flegenheimer, and he took the name Dutch Schultz from a legendary 19th century gangster with the same name. With the auspicious advent of Prohibition, Schultz opened a few speakeasies, began his own trucking service for bootleg Canadian booze, and watched every single penny. "You can insult Dutch's girl, spit in his face, push him around, and he'll laugh," explained one criminal crony of the era, "but don't steal $1 from his accounts. If you do, you're dead." Throughout the 1920s, Schultz and Legs fought it out on the battleground of the New York City streets. The bloody accounts of this and other mob rivalries were so widespread that they became a popular theme in magazines and motion pictures.
In 1920, Prohibition arrived, and a country just recovering from the war jitters fell into a new delirium. The bootlegger sprang into being. Overnight, he switched the nation's mind from battles to bottles. An evasion of the law became the new national pastime. College students, yes, even high school kids and flappers, joined the mad party, and the jazz age was born. The nightclubs were packed with delirious, free-spending thrill hunters. Money poured into the coffers of the underworld to be fought over and stained with blood.
Put that gun away. I get good and ready. That friendship stuff don't mean a thing to me. This guy's got enough on us to... You won't talk. He better not.
You listen to me. You tipped off the feds I was running in a load last night, and they took it away from me. And you lifted it from them.
You're talking through your hat. Makes a lot of noise when you eat spaghetti, too.
You're cute.
But not cute enough.
In 1929, the costly Schultz-Diamond conflict became too much for either to bear. A truce talk was called between the two criminal kingpins at a luxury suite in New York's Harding Hotel. At the tense meeting, Diamond told the Dutchman he could keep his midtown bootlegging operation, an enterprise he'd stolen from Legs, for the price of $500,000. Schultz agreed to the proposal and paid on the spot. But minutes later, on the street below, the Dutchman was accosted by two gunmen who leaped from an alleyway with guns blazing. Schultz miraculously escaped from the incident without injury, but his chief lieutenant, Joey No, had been critically wounded, and the ongoing battle between Dutch Schultz and Legs Diamond quickly resumed. But while Schultz concentrated on his New York City bootleg operations, the ever-ambitious Legs Diamond turned his efforts to upstate New York. It would ultimately prove to be his undoing.
Jack Legs Diamond, typifying the glorified gangster era of the late 20s. Arrested 17 times, acquitted 17 times. Suspected of every crime in the book, Legs Diamond led a charmed life temporarily. He became the target of an aroused public and rival gangsters. End of an era was in sight as Diamond is again in custody. It's ironic that peace officers had no part in terminating his career. Released from charges, Diamond was shot in Albany, New York. Rival gangsters killed him in this rooming house. A public enemy in life, his death started a reform wave that drove gangs into hiding or prison cells. This was Legs Diamond.
Though the killers were never apprehended, Dutch Schultz was suspected of having ordered the ambush of Legs Diamond. Now he set about taking control of the New York rackets. But in 1935, Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey was appointed to bust up the New York mob.
There are few businesses today which do not somehow pay their tribute to racketeers, a tribute levied by force and collected by fear. Racketeers succeed only so long as they can prey upon the fear or weakness of disorganized or timid victims. They fail and run to cover when business and the public, awakened to their own strength, stand up and fight.
To begin his crime-smashing crusade, Dewey had set his sights on the vast holdings of the Dutchman. When Schultz learned of Dewey's plan, he vowed to kill the special prosecutor, and for this, the members of the newly created National Crime Syndicate condemned Schultz himself to death. On October 23, 1935, at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey, Dutch Schultz and 3 of his bodyguards were brutally gunned down by gangsters Charles the Bug Workman and Mendy Weiss. Though shot several times and bleeding profusely, Schultz clung desperately to life at nearby New York City Hospital. There he lapsed in and out of a life-threatening coma, babbling incoherently all the while. But despite the dedicated efforts of doctors and nurses to preserve his life, Dutch Schultz, one of the greatest of the bootlegging kings, died quietly. Machine Gun Kelly was born in 1897, grew up in the poverty-stricken hills of Tennessee, and became a benign society bootlegger in Memphis during the 1920s. Despite his constant brag that no copper will ever take me alive, Kelly was as harmless as a butterfly until he met Catherine Shannon. Catherine married the burly Kelly in 1927, bought him the machine gun that would become his signature, and even forced him to practice with it, honing Kelly's marksmanship like a Marine Corps drill instructor. She then pushed Machine Gun Kelly to use his newfound skill, to carve out a career as a bootlegger extraordinaire. With Catherine promoting Kelly's exploits and even handing out spent cartridges from his machine gun as souvenirs, Machine Gun Kelly gained renown as a ruthless bootlegger and bank robber who'd mow down anybody who got in his way. In actuality, Kelly didn't even like guns, even though he gradually began to believe himself in the image Catherine had created for him. But after branching out for a couple of small-town bank robberies in the early 1930s, Catherine realized the big money was in kidnapping. With this in mind, she pushed Machine Gun Kelly to abduct millionaire oilman Charles Urschel of Oklahoma City. After successfully extracting a $250,000 ransom, the pair released Urschel and proceeded to plan what to do with their newfound fortune. But before Catherine and Kelly could spend much of their loot, the FBI descended upon them, converging on the Memphis hotel the pair was using as a hideout.
Memphis, Tennessee, 1933, and federal agents capture Machine Gun Kelly. Seized with Kelly is his wife, Catherine, and arrangements are made to move both to Oklahoma City for trial. Kelly, wanted for murder in 3 cities, high on the list of public enemies, and suspected leader of the kidnap gang which held oil millionaire Charles Urschel for $200,000 ransom, is to face a jail sentence with 7 others. At the Oklahoma City courthouse, the mother and stepfather of Kelly's wife, along with 5 others, are about to be tried under the so-called Lindbergh federal law. This is Charles Urschel, the kidnapped victim, who sees his captors in court. Kelly and the others await sentence by federal judge vote.
The defendants will please stand.
It's the judgment of this court that R.G. Shannon.
Newsreel cameras and recorders are allowed for the first time at a federal trial as Judge Vaught proceeds to impose penalties on the defendants. All of them are found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment.
For the term of her natural life.
The marshal will retire with the prisoners.
Machine Gun Kelly was sentenced to the island facility of Alcatraz and died behind bars in 1954. Catherine was released in 1958 and began life anew as an anonymous, law-abiding citizen. But Machine Gun Kelly, Pretty Boy Floyd, Dutch Schultz, and Legs Diamond all left enduring legacies which remain in the American consciousness to this day. They were just several of the endlessly fascinating gallery of appalling characters who seared the sensibility of America during the 1920s and 1930s. In the summer of 1930, Pretty Boy Floyd was on the loose. Born in the absolute depths of poverty and raised in the grim Dust Bowl atmosphere delineated in John Steinbeck's classic novel Grapes of Wrath, Charles Arthur Floyd toiled from dawn to dusk in his father's fields. But Floyd's bitterness and frustration with the backbreaking farming life quickly led to a small-time bank holdup and payroll robbery. And after a stint at the Missouri State Penitentiary for the crimes, Floyd earned the nickname that would come to mythologize his barnstorming criminal career. Landing in Kansas City in the late 20s, Floyd entered a local brothel for a meeting with fellow gangsters when a madam, Ann Chambers, said, "I want you for myself, pretty boy." As the 1930s began, the name Pretty Boy Floyd quickly became synonymous with a folk hero like Robin Hood image. Pretty Boy never forgot his impoverished roots, and with this in mind, he'd tear up mortgages in the midst of his bank strikes in the hopes that duplicate copies of the loan notes hadn't been made. But Pretty Boy was robbing so many banks and money-lending companies that insurance rates ballooned beyond belief, and the governor of Oklahoma was finally forced to put a $6,000 reward on his head. And Startling Detective magazine offered their own reward of $4,000, dead or alive. But despite the public support of his Robin Hood with a Tommy gun image, Pretty Boy stumbled badly on June 17, 1933. On that date, 5 men, one of them a top-ranking FBI agent, were brutally massacred in the Kansas City train station by a machine gun posse. The leader of the posse was positively identified as Pretty Boy Floyd. Though Floyd claimed to be miles away from Kansas City at the time, the resulting negative publicity helped turn the tide of public sentiment against Pretty Boy. And FBI agents, led by top G-man Melvin Purvis, intensified their pursuit of the elusive bank robber. Purvis finally caught up with Floyd on October 22, 1934, gunning him down as he raced across an Ohio cornfield. In a customary gesture, newsreels of the day would capture government agents inspecting and posing with their grisly trophy. History judged Pretty Boy Floyd as a murderer and a thief, but to many he was much more. He was a Robin Hood for the common man during America's Great Depression. Like his contemporaries, Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger sprang from a humble home. The greater part of his youth was spent on his father's farm in Morgan County, Indiana. By the age of 10, he had become a selfish, sullen brat. This was to be Dillinger's only true home. Most of his adult life would be spent in prison or in flight from the law. Mooresville, Indiana. Dillinger began his life of crime in this small town when he and an accomplice assaulted the 65-year-old owner of this grocery store. The aged victim recognized Dillinger, and the youth soon found himself incarcerated in the Indiana State Reformatory. Paroled in 1933, Dillinger became involved in several bank robberies, and just 4 months following his parole, he was jailed again in Lima, Ohio. His arrest brought an end to a potential future with his girlfriend, Mary Longnecker. Dillinger is seen here with her at the 1933 Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago. Before Dillinger could begin trial in Lima, 4 convicts Dillinger had befriended escaped from the Michigan City, Indiana penitentiary. Prior to Dillinger's arrest, he had arranged to smuggle guns into the Michigan City prison to facilitate his friend's escape. Now they would return the favor and free John Dillinger. The men were destined to become cornerstones of the Dillinger gang: Harry Pierpont, Charles Mackley, Russell Clark, and John Hamilton. 5 days following their escape, the quartet arrived at the Lima jail and killed the Lima sheriff in their successful bid to free Dillinger. The Dillinger gang first struck at this bank in Racine, Wisconsin, taking $27,000. Then in East Chicago, the gang stole $20,000 more, taking the life of a police officer in their getaway. The police intensified efforts to find Dillinger, and appeals to citizens to phone in Dillinger sightings brought a barrage of tips, theories, and clues from across the country. In this house in Tucson, Arizona, Dillinger and his cohorts were captured 11 days after the East Chicago bank robbery. Following court formalities, it was decided that Dillinger was to be transported by plane to Crown Point to stand trial for the murder of the officer in the East Chicago robbery. Gang members Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark would travel east by train. The lengthy plane flight to the east was met at each refueling stop by the press and the curious. But Dillinger was kept on board except when he quickly changed planes in Memphis. On January 30th, 1934, swelling crowds met Dillinger's plane at Chicago's Municipal Airport. From here, Dillinger would be transferred by car to the Crown Point, Indiana jail. Authorities were convinced that John Dillinger would soon embrace the arms of the electric chair, ending his murderous forays for all time. Dillinger would be carefully guarded at Crown Point. The heavily fortified jail was patrolled by deputies carrying rifles and machine guns. The renowned prisoner was placed in the custody of Sheriff Lillian Holley. She boasted her jail was escape-proof. Dillinger felt otherwise. An almost worshipful display by Sheriff Holley drew widespread criticism from law officials, who were astonished by the homey atmosphere conveyed by this news footage. Dillinger's prosecutor, Robert Estill, drew similar criticism for allowing the outlaw to rest against him in a mocking, self-assured manner. While Dillinger lingered in his cell, he formulated an escape plan. Meanwhile, his gang members, Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark, were returned to Ohio to stand trial for the murder of Sheriff Saber in Lima, who was killed during their breakout of Dillinger. Feeling a false sense of security, vigilance in Crown Point had been relaxed. Guards no longer paraded in front of the jail, while Sheriff Holly baked pies. John Dillinger is said to have been at work carving a gun from a block of wood. Dillinger was able to disguise the wooden gun with black shoe polish. Many historians claim that the wooden gun tale is just another Dillinger myth, and that in actuality, a Dillinger cohort bribed a guard to let him escape. Upon discovering Dillinger gone, a toy gun was hastily prepared to present to the press to cover up the bribe and sidestep the resulting embarrassment. As a further insult to Sheriff Holly, who vowed her jail was escape-proof, Dillinger stole the sheriff's car and sped away unhampered. This garage man was forced to ride with Dillinger for some 50 miles before he was released. He reported that the jubilant bad man sang popular songs as he made good his escape. Dillinger managed to evade the roadblock set up to snare him, but he made a fatal mistake when he crossed into Illinois in Sheriff Holly's car. Now the FBI would intensify the search for Dillinger as he violated federal law transporting stolen property across a state line. Now the noose was tightening around the elusive John Dillinger's neck. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover took it upon himself to end Dillinger's assault upon the law. Hoover called upon the FBI's vast resources. Countless man-hours were devoted to Dillinger's capture, and the agents began training for a special anti-crime force, practicing on targets bearing the likeness of the desperate fugitive. FBI agent Melvin Purvis was placed in charge of Hoover's anti-crime division, which was headquartered in Chicago. However, Dillinger wasn't in Chicago at the time. His flight from the law placed him in St. Paul, Minnesota, where, once spotted, he was again forced to shoot his way to freedom. Dillinger was feeling the increased pressure of the all-out effort to capture him. He traveled from city to city. Finally, he made his way back to his home in Indiana. This would be the final time the public enemy would see his boyhood home, and the last time he would visit his father, who still hoped for the remote possibility of redemption for his son. Back on the run, Dillinger traveled to Warsaw, Indiana. Arriving in town at 2 a.m., he forced the town's only on-duty policeman, Jed Pittenger, at gunpoint to take him to the police station. Dillinger raided the police weapons room and quickly exited Warsaw. Officer Pittenger boasted that he had tried to wrestle the gun away from Dillinger, but was knocked unconscious in the melee. Dillinger sought solace in the secluded and wooded slopes of Spider Lake, Wisconsin. Spider Lake was a popular summer resort town with little or no patronage during the earlier part of the year. It was to this spot that Dillinger came, with 3 men and women, to Little Bohemia, and spent 2 restful days. Emil Winatka, the proprietor, was forced to serve the gang. Acting on another tip, FBI officers surrounded the resort, but one of Mrs. Winatka's dogs barked and gave the alarm. Soon, a blast of machine gun fire began a battle royal. 3 men were shot in the gunfight, and 1 federal officer was killed. Dillinger and 2 of his men abandoned their women and escaped through this window. A dog had barked, and a mad dog was on the loose again. The failure of the FBI to capture Dillinger drew severe criticism. Moreover, the FBI was charged with the shooting of 3 innocent townspeople. FBI agent Carter Bond was killed in the abortive capture attempt. Bond was a close friend of Hoover's anti-crime crusader Melvin Purvis. Now, Agent Purvis had a personal vendetta against Dillinger. Following the Little Bohemia incident, Dillinger would read that his former cohorts, Harry Pierpont and Charles Mackley, were to die in the electric chair, and Russell Clark was to be imprisoned for life. South Bend, Indiana. John Dillinger's final crime took place at noon, June 30th, 1934. Despite the fact that it was a Saturday and crowds filled the street, Dillinger and company boldly stole $28,000 from the Merchants National Bank. In his escape, Dillinger opened fire with a machine gun, killing a policeman and wounding 4 bystanders in a pointless shooting spree. Chicago, Illinois. This would be the last chapter in the John Dillinger saga. Public enemy number 1 was finding his potential hideouts dwindling. Underworld shelter was not open to John Dillinger, and the circle of friends who he could trust had greatly diminished. Most of his former gang members were in prison or dead. Anna Sage was a convicted prostitute facing deportation. She knew of Dillinger's whereabouts. In exchange for a promise of FBI intervention in her deportation case, she would betray her friend John Dillinger to the authorities. Chicago's Biograph Theater. On a hot, muggy night, John Dillinger planned to relax at the movies. A crime film, Manhattan Melodrama, was the featured attraction. Dillinger arrived at the box office just before the film began. Anna Sage accompanied Dillinger. Under the marquee lights, her orange dress appeared to be colored red, blood red, and forevermore she would be referred to as the Lady in Red. While the pair watched Manhattan Melodrama inside the Biograph Theater, a real-life drama was taking place outside. FBI agents scurrying about the alley behind the theater and across the street from the ticket booth caught the attention of the theater manager. Fearing the suspicious characters lurking about were planning to rob the box office, the police were summoned. As Dillinger enjoyed the air-conditioned comfort of the theater auditorium, outside in the searing July heat, frantic FBI agents argued with the Chicago police officers investigating the manager's call. Ironically, the film's villain, Clark Gable, paid for his crimes with his life at the film's conclusion. Then the curtain closed on Manhattan Melodrama and on John Dillinger as well. Folk legend and Hollywood accounts of the FBI's final confrontation with John Dillinger often suggest that he died dramatically in a hail of gunfire.
FBI, Dillinger, don't move!
Actually, Dillinger was only shot twice. As Agent Melvin Purvis called out, "Dillinger!" the outlaw immediately reached for the Colt automatic pistol he carried and ran toward an alley. The agents fired. One bullet went through his left side. The second bullet tore into Dillinger's stooped back and exited his right eye. Dillinger was rushed to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in the company of 5 FBI agents, but he died en route. His body was transferred to the Cook County morgue, where his identity was verified. Outside, curiosity seekers began to gather. Crowds also sprang up at the Biograph Theater. Hundreds of Chicago natives made a pilgrimage to the theater to retrace Dillinger's final steps. Throngs of people would stare at the spot where the public enemy was felled. No remnant of Dillinger's blood remained on the alley pavement, having been mopped up with handkerchiefs and pieces of paper by the more morbid in the crowd. A circus-like atmosphere also prevailed at the morgue. Dillinger's bloody corpse was washed and examined by Dr. Charles Parker, who gave cameramen and newspaper reporters carte blanche access to the morgue. In death, John Dillinger may have had more photos taken of him than when he was living. The general public was also admitted to view the corpse. Lines outside the morgue stretched for over a quarter of a mile. Some went through the long line 2 or 3 times. Fascinated by the sight of a slain bank robber. One officer from the Chicago Police Department was so pleased to see Dillinger dead that he actually shook the hand of the corpse. Outside the morgue, a barker passed through the crowd, offering cloth swatches of Dillinger's dried blood. Another furor over the dead man arose when it was discovered that Dillinger's brain, which had been removed during his autopsy, had disappeared. In his 14 months of carnage, 18 had died and $470,000 were stolen. The net profit to John Dillinger was $7.70, found in his pocket at the time of his death, and a cold slab in the morgue. A simple wicker basket bore the body of John Dillinger as it was transported to a funeral home in Mooresville, Indiana. Once again, hundreds of citizens arrived for a glimpse of the infamous murderer's corpse. Dillinger was dressed in a new gray suit with sleeves so long they almost covered his hands. A procession of 20 cars accompanied the remains of John Dillinger to Crown Point Cemetery, despite protest against Dillinger sharing the same hallowed ground with former United States President Benjamin Harrison. Rain poured as Dillinger's coffin was lowered into the ground. That same day, Dillinger Sr. had turned down an offer of $10,000 for his son's body. The elder Dillinger, fearing that his son's body might be stolen, had 3 feet of cement poured over the coffin. While the senior Mr. Dillinger would not lower himself to exhibit his wayward son's mortal remains, he publicly announced that he would consider offers regarding the sale of John Jr.'s clothing and personal possessions. John Dillinger's survivors, including his father, sister, brother-in-law, and half-brother, were deluged with offers from a wide variety of promoters wishing to exploit the Dillinger legend. Less than a week had passed before the Dillingers accepted an offer to appear on stage at Indianapolis Lyric Theater. Between films, they gave a series of 15-minute lectures and reminisced about John's life and times. John Dillinger Sr. continued to lecture about his son in a number of traveling carnival shows and gave similar speeches at Little Bohemia, the scene of his son's most colorful shootout. Emil Winnetka, who was once held captive by the outlaw, was now Dillinger Sr.'s partner in the exploitive venture. Anna Sage, the Lady in Red, was paid $10,000 by the FBI for her part in bringing Dillinger to justice.
Later, the Lady in Red, Mrs. Anna Sage, found herself facing deportation as an undesirable alien. She and her attorney tried to fight the case.
Why did you arrange the capture of John Dillinger?
To slash so many people. When I learned he was Dillinger, I knew he had been killing without mercy. So I went to a policeman I knew, and he arranged a conference with the government agents. So July 22nd, I called Mr. Purvis, and I told him that Dillinger was going to a show. The government agent will follow us. When we came out, they tried to capture Dillinger, and he was killed. So I've done my part.
The request to stay her deportation was denied, however, and she died in Romania in 1947. 32 days after the death of Dillinger, an old crime partner, Homer Van Meter, joined John in death following a gun battle with police in St. Paul, Minnesota. Evelyn Frenchette, a former girlfriend of the outlaw, had attended Dillinger's Indiana trial to cheer him on. Eventually, her association with Dillinger led to her imprisonment. Frenchette, now known as the Gorgeous Hellcat, also joined the sideshow circuit upon her release from prison, promoting herself as one of the loves of Dillinger's life. She would often promote her appearances by distributing picture postcards of herself. Melvin Purvis, the FBI agent generally credited for the capture of Dillinger, resigned from the FBI a year after closing the Dillinger file. He often made himself available for interviews. Purvis committed suicide by handgun in 1960. The 1930s is often referred to as the lawless decade. By the dawn of World War II, the FBI and various police departments had exterminated the country's major public enemies. Now, 50 years had passed since John Dillinger was silenced. But with every passing decade, he continues to be celebrated or damned in countless books and magazine articles. Movies such as The FBI Story portray 1930s era criminals as humanity's lowest common denominator.
Dillinger had Homer Van Meter and John Hamilton as partners. They made quite a trio. A policeman was dead, and Dillinger's friend, John Hamilton, was badly wounded. Dillinger's procedure was simple. He decided to let his girlfriend, Connie, take care of Hamilton while he took a trip to Chicago to cool off.
Through the years, John Dillinger has been portrayed many times on screen, most notably by Lawrence Tierney, Nick Adams, and Warren Oates. The screen career of Humphrey Bogart accelerated when producers took note of Bogart's close resemblance to Dillinger. The character he portrayed in The Petrified Forest was loosely based on the real-life bank robber. Hollywood film studios found the flamboyant exploits of John Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde an excellent source for script ideas. Americans today are still fascinated by these stories of a bygone era when mobsters and murderers ruled the streets of cities and towns across the United States. The newsreels give the facts, but the real stories of Al Capone, John Dillinger, and Bonnie and Clyde, and other criminal minds of the roaring 20s and restless 30s will be retold for generations as part of the folklore of our nation. They called them public enemies. Bonnie Parker, Clyde Barrow. They were among America's most wanted crime figures in the 1930s. Collectively, these small-town terrors wove a tapestry of murder, bank robbery, and violence which rivaled the bloody gang wars of big city mobs. Ironically, to many Americans, the trio became folk heroes, their exploits being glamorized by newspaper columnists and radio reporters. The fact that Bonnie and Clyde were bank robbers actually endeared them to many, who felt victimized by the bank failures and the property foreclosures of the Depression era. The accounts of gun battles, furious car chases, and desperate escapes reported by the daily press provided young readers with adventure stories, similar to those found in comic magazines and radio serials. However, these attitudes changed as body counts rose, when tales of the misery caused to the innocent victims by the criminals were reported. Bonnie Parker was born in 1910 in Plano, Texas. Clyde Barrow was born on March 24, 1909 in Talese, Texas, one of 8 children. He ended up in prison at an early age for theft. This 1930s short subject presents an accurate depiction of Bonnie and Clyde's formative years and their rise to notoriety. Upon his release from prison, Clyde Barrow embarked on a career of crime, and his partner was Bonnie Parker, a 19-year-old waitress and ex-wife of a convict whose future held little promise. While waiting for fellow gang members after a robbery, Bonnie and Clyde celebrated by drinking heavily by a roadside and testing their weapons skills. 2 State Patrol motorcycle policemen heard the pair's gunshots and decided to investigate. As in other instances, the murderous pair demonstrated little conscience as they shot the patrolman in cold blood. The names Bonnie and Clyde became household words as their assault on law and order continued. As the body count of peace officers mounted, lawmen viewed the capture of the duo as a personal crusade. Police decided to fight fire with regard to the capture of Bonnie and Clyde, and adopted the use of stronger firepower to combat their arsenal of lethal weapons. The law's search for Bonnie and Clyde ended when they were sighted near Arcadia, Louisiana. Dallas, Texas Deputy Sheriff Bob Alcorn and his team of sworn deputies ascertained the route of the murderous pair. They waited alongside this rural backroad for 3 days to capture America's most wanted bandits. The lawmen had decided to ambush the pair. Bonnie and Clyde had somehow managed to escape arrest too many times in the past, leaving dead and wounded police officers behind. The sheriff would not allow them an opportunity to escape again.
That's him, fellas. Release him, Clyde. Let him have it. Look down.
This film was made at the scene of the ambush, about 5 minutes after the shooting which ended the criminals' lives. This was the inevitable end, final retribution for a couple who died as they lived, by the gun. In death, Bonnie's body leans against that of Clyde in their final embrace. Soon, curiosity seekers would descend upon the scene. One ghoulish souvenir hunter attempted to slice off Clyde Barrow's ear before being restrained by one of the deputies. 54 bullets had pierced Clyde Barrow's body. His left hand was severed at the wrist. Following the removal of the bodies, an inventory was taken of their car. Clyde Barrow traveled with a small arsenal. On this fateful day, Barrow had with him 2 sawed-off shotguns, 2 machine rifles, 10 automatic pistols, and 1,500 rounds of ammunition. Ironically, Bonnie Parker's makeup case lay beside the cache of guns and ammo. At the time of her death, Bonnie wore a flowered hat and had a new permanent wave, a picture far removed from Bonnie Parker on a murderous spree. Clyde Barrow's guns were his particular vanity. Nightly, he would spend hours polishing and cleaning his weapons. He would refer to each by a pet name. A large cross-section of Midwestern and Southern license plates were found concealed under the back seat of the death car. The killers would conveniently change plates to help evade capture as they moved from state to state. The damage sustained by the Bonnie and Clyde death car was made by the magnum force of hundreds of steel-jacketed bullets dispensed by the officers' high-powered rifles. So potent were the bullets' trajectories that most direct hits went through the driver's side corridor, through the body of Clyde Barrow, through Bonnie Parker's body, and out through the door on her side of the car. To this day, the bullet-riddled Bonnie and Clyde death car remains a popular attraction at a casino outside Las Vegas. Due to the crossfire of the ambush, Bonnie Parker's body sustained more bullet wounds than Clyde's. Widely reported accounts of Bonnie's head being severed at the scene are refuted by this rare morgue photo. Pictured here are 4 of the 6 deputies who took part in the ambush, including, second from the right, Dallas Deputy Sheriff Bob Alcorn, who identified Bonnie and Clyde and issued the order to open fire. Beside him on the far right is Deputy Sheriff Ted Hinton. In a 1974 interview, the retired lawman recalled,
"They had to know they'd be caught eventually. But back then, after Bonnie and Clyde killed the first man, they just had no return. They had to keep going, because they was going to get killed anyhow. They went nearly 2 full years and was in 21 gun battles before we finally got them. During that time, they killed 11 peace officers and 2 civilians."
Lemonade stands and hot dog booths were set up to accommodate the crowds attending Clyde Barrow's funeral. This would be the second outlaw son buried by Barrow's parents. Clyde's brother and fellow gang member, Buck Barrow, died following a shootout with police sometime earlier. Bonnie Parker's funeral was not the spectacle Clyde Barrow's became. Under 150 family, friends, relatives, and reporters were in attendance. Her sister, Billie Mae, imprisoned at the time of Bonnie's death, was allowed to attend, accompanied by a prison matron and 2 deputies. The parents of both outlaws also watched as Clyde Barrow's only friend was lowered into her grave. Following her release from prison, Billie Mae recorded a remarkably prophetic poem by her famous sister.
"From heartbreak, some people have suffered. From weariness, some people have died. But take it all in all, our troubles are small till we get like Bonnie and Clyde. Someday they will go down together, and they will bury them side by side. To a few, it means grief. To the law, it's relief, but it's death to Bonnie and Clyde."
Hollywood film studios, however, found the flamboyant exploits of John Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde an excellent source for script ideas and promoted the myths and folk legends which surround the lawbreakers. Clyde Barrow's definitive screen counterpart was Warren Beatty, and Bonnie Parker found cinematic life in Jean Arvey, Dorothy Provine, and Faye Dunaway. Even though their 2-year murderous spree claimed more than a dozen lives, Bonnie and Clyde became folk heroes for generations, and their legend of bank robbing and gunfighting continued to surface in the restless 30s.